Hi, I'm David Felts, and I want to welcome you to our clip today. And welcome to our garden. Isn't it lovely? We've had a few reports on it, and if you know me, I'm certain you realize that my wife is the architect, and she has the green thumb in the family. Thank you, Chitra, for making such beautiful surroundings, and welcome to our uh, promised land, our garden. Today we're going to talk again about the power of prayer. And I want to give one more example, testimony if you will, before we start talking about some of the strategic prayers. It was the 1940s, mid to late 1940s, and just prior to that, a mother in Baltimore, Maryland had been praying constantly over her son. She had raised him in church. He was now grown and was rebelling against God and against the moral values in which she had tried diligently to instill in him. And he was running with the Wilder gang, and he was doing what he wanted to do, oblivious to or not caring about her desires. Many of the night, he would stumble in the middle of the night drunk, and he would almost trip over her as she laid prostrate in the floor praying for him night after night after night. She would be praying for his deliverance, praying for his salvation, praying for his restoration, and she very diligently prayed for him, and he very diligently resisted not the devil, but resisted his mother's prayers. He was doing all he could do to break her heart. As young men often do, he got into trouble, and it was at a time to where the legal system was different than it is today. And he was given an option. Either you go to jail or you go to war. And he chose war. He joined the Army, or I guess it would have been the Navy. And he was, after basic training, stationed to his first assignment overseas. And he happened to be stationed to Iceland. And he was assigned to a crew, a fairly small crew of sailors that went into a submarine that did investigations and did, for lack of a better word, spying. And they would do reconnaissance missions and gather information and bring it back to the hierarchies who would establish their game plan. And on one particular outing, his mother had been faithful in praying for year after year after year for him. This particular outing, they were near the bottom of the ocean when suddenly the submarine lost all power. And it settled on the ocean floor, and the captain, conferring with his officers, came to the entire group. There were only about 40 sailors there, and he delivered the worst possible news. He told them that their power sources were completely gone, and unless they received a miracle, they only had, I think it was 24 hours worth of oxygen left in the submarine, and then they would all perish. They would die. And the captain asked them if any of them knew how to pray. And with 40 sailors, you would think somebody did, but nobody responded. There was nobody that knew how to pray. And a quick aside, that is one of the motivations of our decision to minister on methods of prayer, because what I'm finding is that even in the church, too few people really know how to effectually pray. So this young man, Johnny, and his crew searched diligently for somebody that knew to pray, and nobody responded. Nobody knew how to pray. And finally, Johnny responded and said, "Sir, I don't know how to pray, but my mama is a praying woman. And if mama knew where we were, is there any way to get word to her? Is there any way to notify her of our tragedy? Because mama prays and shakes heaven and hell when she prays." And the captain sadly shook his head and said, if none of you know how to pray, can somebody at least pray that mama's awakened and notified by God, because we have no way to notify her. It was about that same time that Johnny's mom in Baltimore, Maryland, was suddenly awakened with an urgency to pray. An urgency beyond what she had felt since Johnny left. She had an intense need, as it were, to give herself to pray. And she began to storm the spirit world with prayers. And she did battle as though she were fighting for his son's life. She had no idea what was going on, but she prayed through the night. The next morning, she received a phone call. For you see, just before the end of that hour was up, and they were all resigned to the fact that they were going to die, suddenly things began to shake, and the officer went and tried the power system again, and everything worked. Everything came on. And he was able to power up the submarine and rise it to the top of the sea, and they safely returned to Iceland, in which they were quartered. It was an answer to Mama's prayer, and Johnny needed to know. Johnny needed to call his mom. As a matter of fact, all of them gathered around the payphone as Johnny made the call, and the captain came and took the phone right out of Johnny's hand, introduced himself to Mom, and said, "I'm Johnny's captain, and I need to ask you a question before Johnny comes to the phone. Were you praying for him, for us, last night?" And she said, "It's funny you should ask. I prayed all night long. At such and such a time, I was suddenly awakened, feeling an urgency to pray, and I turned myself to pray, and I began to pray with intensity and with passion, as suddenly an urgency arose within me, and I began to storm the heavens with my prayer." And the captain, with tears running down his eyes, said, "Ma'am, we were all going to die last night. And Johnny told us that you knew how to pray. And none of us effectually knew how to pray. We knew how to quote some prayers, and we knew how to quote some poems that sounded like prayers, but none of us really knew how to get a hold of God. And so I encouraged all of the men to pray that you would be awakened and alerted to pray, and you were. And I thank you, ma'am, for being obedient. We're here today. As a matter of fact, the next person you're going to talk to is the person that drove you to this prayers. Here's Johnny." And Mama was weeping, and Johnny was weeping. And at the end of that conversation, all 40 of those young men in unison prayed the sinner's prayer with Mommy and gave their lives to Jesus. They had come to the end of their life. They knew that they should be in eternity. They had lived to tell their story because this mom knew how to pray. And she had indeed prayed for her son, and their lives were all spared because of her faithfulness and because of the faithfulness of God to hear and to answer a mother's prayer. I want to say to you moms, please don't give up in your well-doing. Please know that your sons and your daughters are worth your prayers. Please know that God is listening to your prayers, and He will answer your prayers, and He will not only restore the life of your son and your daughter, but He'll restore your relationship with them. For you see, Johnny had become, after that, a man of God and lived long to tell the story and to value his mom and to value her dedication to him and to God. A mother's prayer is so powerful, and prayer does change things, and nobody prays with more intensity and more passion than a mother does for her children as they are struggling. Maybe they're struggling with sickness and disease. Maybe they're struggling with sin and addiction, but they're struggling and they need your prayers, and God is on wait to hear your prayer and to respond to your prayer and to deliver them. You know, I'm so grateful for my mother. I too have a praying mom, and I've had the great privilege of traveling the nations and seeing hundreds of thousands surrender their lives to Jesus Christ. What a joy that is. My mom hasn't had the same privilege, but shares the same credit because she prayed for this son, and it receives equal credit for what I have done when the score is tallied in heaven. I believe that. Moms, your sons and your daughters have great futures. I don't know what God has in store for them, but I know His plans are great, and His plans are to bless them, not to do them harm. His plans are that they finish well, and that's what I know your plans are too. And when you agree with God and pray for them, it releases the power of God to affect the change in them that needs to be affected, and they will arise to the greatness for which they were created. Be faithful, moms. Nobody loves more than you do. Be faithful, be diligent, be earnest, because God will reward your faithfulness. He too is faithful and He is true. God bless you. Share this with anybody that you think needs it. And we love you and appreciate you joining us today. God bless you much.